Welcome, everybody. I'm Beth Van Schok. I'm a fellow with the Center for Human Rights and International Justice here at Stanford. And I'm thrilled that this conversation is happening and that we have not forgotten the fate of the 43. In a country like Mexico, where there are tens of thousands of disappearances, it's remarkable that this case has remained so salient in our hearts and minds. It's in many respects emblematic of the situation of human rights in Mexico and actually across the region in many respects. On the one hand, it exemplifies the deep collusion between the drug cartels and the security services, including law enforcement at the national and even the local level. It also is an example of the deeply entrenched impunity when it comes to international human rights more broadly. And the corruption of the judicial system, when we had judges and other actors within that judicial system hiding evidence that might have shed light on the situation that happened on that terrible, fateful day. It also is quite indicative of the ravages that are played by the seemingly insatiable demand for drugs from the north that pass through the south. And we know that that was very much a part of what happened to those boys that day, those boys and men that day. And also the imperialist relationship that the United States has towards its southern neighbor when it was prosecuting two members of Guerreros Unidos, which was the gang that was the narco gang that was ostensibly involved in the massacre, and yet refused to share information with investigators and prosecutors, including from the inter-American system, that might have shed light on the fate of the disappeared. And so in so many ways, this particular case encapsulates all of these dynamics across our hemisphere. We have a terrific panel here to discuss some of these issues. I'm going to introduce Clarette, who will be our moderator and our discussant, and then she'll introduce the rest of the speakers. So Clarette is no stranger to Stanford. She was here running our Human Rights Center for many years. She's now a senior staff attorney with the Center for Justice and Accountability, which is a United States-based nonprofit in San Francisco, an anti-impunity organization that works to hold perpetrators of human rights abuses to account in whatever courtrooms are available to them, but also to represent survivors in their multifaceted quest for justice. She's worked on a number of civil suits involving the hemisphere in Argentina, Colombia, and Chile, and with a number of different human rights groups around the world to support their accountability efforts. She litigates under the Alien Tort Statute and the Torture Victim Protection Act, and she also collaborates with documentarians around the globe on their accountability efforts. She previously served as Director of Research at MSI Integrity and as Director of Internationalization at De Justicia, which is a Colombia-based human rights organization nonprofit. She was, as I mentioned, the Executive Director of our Human Rights Center many years ago, focusing on human rights practice and educating the next generation of human rights leaders, and also had a focus on the inter-American system of human rights. While living in Massachusetts, she was an employee-side class action litigator, and she clerked at the U.S. District Court for the District of Massachusetts. She's authored one of the first English language case books on the full inter-American system and teaches a course on the doctrine and practice of the inter-American system with the Center for Latin American Studies. So please join me in welcoming Claudia.
Thank you so much, and what an honor it is to be here to speak about Ayotzinapa and to introduce and moderate a panel of just people that I have admired and some of them followed and stalked for many years as a fan of their fantastic work. I'm speaking about Claudia, of course. So I think that first and foremost, we want to just give a little bit of background on the facts about Ayotzinapa for those of you who might not be familiar with them, and those of you who are familiar with them who may want a refresher about what the facts are. And then, so we're going to show a short video first, and then I will have the opportunity to introduce each of the speakers. I want to say that the structure of this panel is intended to provide you with the voices and reflections of three remarkable investigators who worked on uncovering the truth and combating so many of the forces that and acts that were attempting to impose an official version of the events that was not true. And so we will hear from a journalist, member of the Truth Commission that was established, the HIE, and a prosecutor who conducted an investigation on the case. I will introduce each of them in turn. And so first, let me introduce you to John Gibler. Well, actually, let's see the video first, and then I'll introduce you to John. So if I could ask the video to be shown, and I think I'll just stand here. And this was selected by our panel, so I know it's vetted for being a crisp.
September 2014, students of Ayotzinapa were getting ready to participate in a massive march that takes place every year in Mexico City, which commemorates the massacre of hundreds of students in Mexico City on October 2nd, 1968, which was right before Mexico was about to host the Olympics and kind of position itself on the world stage as this emerging first world nation. Because there's no really reliable, inexpensive public transportation system. There's a tradition of commandeering buses to get you where you need to go. On September 26, 2014, the students were planning to gather buses to take rural teachers college students from all over the country to Mexico City to participate in the march. They had haphazardly pulled together a group of first-year students, about 80 to 90 of them, and aboard two already commandeered buses, traveled like an hour and a half windy road from Ayotzinapa towards Iguala.
Prendemos el ingreso a la ciudad de Iguala. Íbamos dos autobuses, íbamos nosotros para ese día que teníamos la encomienda de ir por más autobuses. Llegamos a la terminal. En ese momento se empiezan a escuchar algunas sirenas de patrullas a lo lejos y dicen los compañeros, pues ya estamos aquí, hay que tomar algunos autobuses. Empezamos a avanzar poco a poco. Al pasar por el zócalo de la ciudad de Iguala, se empezaron a escuchar algunos disparos. No creímos que fueran contra nosotros. Pasando el zócalo, hubo un momento en el que la balacera se intensifica. Todo empieza a empeorar. Hay muchos elementos de la policía por todos lados. Nos dicen que nos volvamos a bajar. Se intensifica la balacera. Empezamos a aventar lo que podíamos. Yo me acuerdo que aventé una piedra y una botella de agua.
Estoy grabando. Que te vean. Como la punta de estudiantes.
De una forma alcancé a subirme al primer autobús que iba, en la parte de adelante. Atraviesa la patrulla 002 y nos impide el paso. Nos bajamos del autobús y empezamos a empujar la patrulla. Se oye una descarga, una balacera. Empezamos a gritar que dejaran de disparar, que éramos estudiantes, no tenemos armas.
¡Ya mataron a un compañero! ¡Ya mataron a uno! ¡Ya mataron a uno, Carlos!
Veo caer a mi izquierda a mi compañero. Veo que cae y se hace un charco de sangre.
¡Una ambulancia! ¡Traigan aquí la ambulancia!
The students, once they are getting shot at, aboard these different buses and these different scenes, they're calling reporters, they're calling their classmates and their colleagues. And at the school, the students, a group of students go into emergency mode
Hay unos reportan que hay muertos y están detenidos. Los acaban de balacear en Iguala. Entonces dijimos, bueno, tenemos que ir, vámonos, a apoyar, a ver qué se puede hacer, ¿no? Y ya cuando íbamos ahí a entrar a Iguala, cuando del lado derecho no, pues vimos ahí a gente armada. Y no supimos si eran policías municipales, o sea, no, sicarios, todos de negro. Y entonces dijo, ¿qué hago? ¿Qué hago? ¿Me paro? Y dijimos, no, síguete, ahí ve cómo lo haces.
Abajo de los autobuses nos refugiamos de una u otra forma. Si tú te asomabas, había disparos por parte de los policías. Los policías municipales que se encontraban en la parte de atrás del tercer autobús abrieron la puerta y bajaron a un aproximado de 20 compañeros. Los tiraron en la banqueta y se los empezaron a llevar en unas patrullas. Nosotros no podíamos hacer nada.
Llegamos al centro de Iguala, de ahí nos dijo una muchacha, ¿saben qué? Miren, aquí agarren todo derecho, allá, dicen, ya están sus amigos, vayan. Estaban ahí los chavos. Me subí al autobús, todo con sangre, por aquí, por allá, las camisas, los asientos del autobús con las perforaciones. No, realmente, pues una escena de guerra.
Se empezó a mover. Movimientos involuntarios, el disparo fue en la cabeza. Pedíamos una ambulancia. El compañero se estaba desangrando. Hubo un momento en el que la ambulancia le dieron acceso. Se llevó al compañero Aldo. Yo sentí que ahí me iba a morir, que ahí me iban a matar. Lo dábamos por muerto, compañero Aldo. Ver que el compañero Aldo ya había caído. Ver que si te movías te disparaban. Ver que se estaban llevando a tus compañeros. Hubo un momento en el que yo dije, pues hasta aquí llegué.
Over the course of the night, students have been attacked at different points. Students have run away. Students have hidden. Students have been attacked again. The students were apprehended and taken away in official vehicles. Nowhere did they think some mass forced disappearance was about to take place. They thought these are police officers with uniforms. They're being taken to jail.
During the attacks, Aldo is critically injured. 3 students and 3 members of the public are killed, and a large group of students go missing.
And thank you. And this is where our conversation begins. Let me introduce John Gibbler, who was also one of the narrators here, and ask our speakers to kind of join us again. That is the backdrop against which the work of our 3 panelists starts, obviously not at the same time, not all at exactly at the same moment. But I think it's important that, considering that 11 years have passed since the Ayotzinapa events, we can hear again the perspectives of those who investigated and actually searched for the truth and supported the families in their search for the truth. I'm going to start with John. John Gibbler is the author of Mexico Unconquered, Chronicles of Power and Revolt in 2009. Well, many books on Mexico, but I want to let you know about all of them. To Die in Mexico, Dispatches from Inside the Drug War, 20 poemas para ser leídos en una balacera, and this, I couldn't even imagine that they would kill us, an oral history of the attacks against the students of Ayotzinapa, published in 2017, Torn from the World, a guerrilla's escape from a secret prison in Mexico, 2018, and La Tierra de Vallejo, un diario de viaje, from 2022. John, I leave the floor to you, and thank you. And, choose whether you want to stand here or there, whichever.
Oh, hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Clara. Thank you very much, Elizabeth and Samantha, for the invitations and for all of your amazing work coordinating this event, helping make things smooth and possible. And thank you everyone for coming out to listen. It's indeed an honor to be here. Elizabeth is a dear friend of many, many years, my colleague, someone I admire greatly. And also Omar and Claudia. It's an honor to share the same conversation with you. I admire you both very much. Of course, a deep part of my heart wishes we weren't here in this room at all, of course, and we hadn't met in the way that we did. In 20 minutes, and please interrupt me when they're up, I'd like to try and share with you all some reflections on where we stand 11 years. You know, there's so much information that has now come out about the atrocity committed on the night of September 26, 27, 2014, and the way in which that the denial of that atrocity has led to both the continuation of the open wound that is mass forced disappearance here, and also a new series, a new concatenation of atrocities in the process of maintaining denial. And I'd like to try and offer something hopefully interesting, useful to think about these 11 years, maybe be a bit brazen and a bit provocative. Hopefully I might end up being boring, I hope not, but something maybe brazen and provocative to help us think and spark some debate, perhaps, about what this means and what it reveals to us. A few weeks ago, for something else I was working on, I was rereading Mark Danner's 1993 New Yorker report called The Truth of El Mozote, which was later published as a book called The Massacre of El Mozote. And kind of at the end of his lead section, which is brilliantly crafted, he puts forth a kind of argument, like the basic thesis, if you will, of his piece on El Mozote. And he writes, El Mozote may have been the largest massacre in modern Latin American history. That in the United States it came to be known, that is exposed to the light and then fell back into the dark, makes the story of El Mozote, how it came to happen and how it came to be denied, a central parable of the Cold War. And as I was reading, I've read this book and this article many times over the years. It's been important to me in many ways. And I was rereading it, thinking about this conversation today, and the kind of just recasting of that thesis statement hit me in the face. And it's basically as follows. Ayotzinapa may have been one of the largest single event forced disappearances in modern Latin American history. That in Mexico, it came to be known. That every time it began to be exposed to the light, it was pulled back into the dark. Makes the story of Ayotzinapa, how it came to happen, how it came to be denied, how it continues to be denied, a central parable of the drug war and the democratic transition in Mexico. And here is where I'd like to go into a kind of side conversation about the denial. I think, you know, my claim, and I think a lot of people will stand by it, is that as soon as the events happened, all levels of government immediately entered into different practices, techniques of denial, right? And I'll talk a little about that in just one second. And then there have been now 3 successive administrations. I think there's near universal consensus that the government at the time, Enrique Peña Nieto's pre-administration of 2012 to 2018, tried to cover up the truth. And they created a thing called the historical truth, la verdad histórica. I'll give a little bit more context about that second, to cover that up. Then there was a new government, 2018, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, right? It was this, in many ways, a culmination of perhaps decades of social organizing in Mexico. In many ways, perhaps could be considered the culmination of the democratic transition in Mexico, this government of change, of combating corruption. And my claim is that that government also chose to deny the facts and the meaning of the facts of what happened to the 43 students in Ayotzinapa. And they tried to do so in a very different way, with different techniques, different technologies. And then now we have a third administration, the Claudia Sheinbaum administration, which is perhaps been the least active of the three. It's also been in office much less time. And my claim is also that what little they have done so far, which is mainly discursive, shows us that they are continuing on the same path of denial. And to go into this for a second, I'd like to quote a book that I thought was really important, published by criminologist, sociologist Stanley Cohen in 2001, called States of Denial. I rarely see it mentioned or talked about, which is always curious to me. I checked to see if it's at the Stanford Library, and it is, so thanks, Stanford. Very good. And I recommend this book called The States of Denial, 2001. Stanley Cohen identifies 3 different stages of denial. And he's really writing about denial of mass atrocity, right? You could talk about denial of all kinds of personal knowledge or traumatic events in an individual life, so on. But he's talking about states of denial of knowledge about mass atrocity. And he defines first literal denial, that did not happen, right? Interpretive denial, this happened, but the events are interpreted a different way. The students were disappeared, but they were, infiltrated by a rival drug cartel, and that's what happened, and so on. I'll go into more detail. And implicatory denial, which is a denial of the meaning, the moral and psychological truth of an event, the meaning, the impact, the implications, the social ramifications of mass atrocity. And this, I think, is useful to think about what happened in Ayotzinapa, literal denial. As the students were being disappeared, Sergio Campo, La Jornada correspondent in Chilpancingo, the capital of Guerrero, got wind of the news because the students, as I said in a little video, I had no idea that was going to be shown, by the way, they said, I talked to a young radio reporter, actually Sergio's son, Lenin, who told me that he was on the air with his rock in Spanish language radio program on Friday night, and some of the students had his phone number and called him and said they were being attacked, and he said it live on the air, right? So literally, even with analog or some analog technologies, there was live transmission of the fact the students were being attacked in Iguala. Sergio, when he finds out, he's at dinner with his wife, and he calls the mayor of Iguala, Jose Luis Abarca, and Abarca says, no, hombre, Iguala está en paz, aquí no pasa nada. Everything's fine in Iguala, nothing's happening. And anyway, those rabble-rousing students, if they were to come and disturb the peace, we'd show them what Iguala is all about, but nothing's happening. So literal denial. And that's sustained over days and weeks. In Yaqui Blanco, I was there, I physically heard it when they uncovered the first series of mass graves, 28 mass graves in the outskirts of Iguala on October 4th, 2014. And the reporters were all there, and Yaqui Blanco drives up. They're not letting us get anywhere near to the gravesite. There's army and police. There's the Algones, the kind of drug lookout scouts or cartel lookout scouts were just around the corner. They'd been following us on motorcycles since we were coming into town. And Iñaki Blanco said, as well as a state police officer, Wences, who's later killed, he told me directly, 17 of the bodies in these graves belong to the students. The rest are already on their way home, which is just patently absurd. We'd just driven from the school, right? We just had a meeting with the parents that very morning when we heard that these mass graves have been found. So we show up there. Iñaki Blanco tells some reporter, don't quote me on this, but some of these bodies belong to the students. So this is the literal denial of these facts that you think are happening aren't happening. The facts being forced disappearance, right? And here they're saying, oh, here's some of these bodies. And even before that, I remember in the first few days, I think the governor, as well as some state officials, said, look, 14 students just found their way back. The initial list, the front page of La Jornada on September 27, 2014 was 57 students disappeared because there was a miscount, because there were a number of students on a different bus who didn't reconvene early on that morning. Some of them, terrified, found their way home. Some of them found their way back to the school, and they weren't fully accounted for until later that day. So they were in the press that online, the number of 43 was established over the course of the Saturday, September 27th. And the government used that and said, look, see, a bunch of them just came back. The rest of them are probably still hiding in the hills. There are all these attempts to literally deny that even anything was happening immediately. But very quickly, we go into the stages of interpretive denial. Well, also, the literal denial continues over the course of years when the PRI builds this false narrative, which is known in Mexico as la verdad histórica, or the historical truth. It's that the students were taken to a trash dump that very night by, like, the police grabbed them, but police turned them over to the drug cartel, which that verb, that operation is, I think, central to the whole idea that there is a distinction between the police and a drug cartel, which is what the government must maintain and what is patently untrue and what does not enable us to understand what really happened that night. But there's this turning over of the students from the cops to the sicarios, to the cartel gunmen, and they drive them out to this remote open air trash dump, and they incinerate their bodies over the course of the night, right? This is the story that the government will push over and over and over, and is itself entirely untrue. It is a thing that they created through torture of detainees and through the production of testimonies, and then also through a series of what would, in a place with something like a rule of law, be federal crimes, right? Like manufacturing false evidence, destroying evidence, lying about evidence, torturing to produce false testimonies, all of these things in themselves in the service of the continuation of the disappearance. So all of these things in themselves constituting atrocity. And even, I think, with AMLO, we're jumping way ahead and forgive the chaos, but when he has this huge fight with the HIE and with the families about the existence of certain military documents, it's literal denial. They're literally, the documents have been published and the president's saying they don't exist. And then the documents show the existence of other documentation that hasn't yet been found. And the families, the HIE, are saying, can we see these documents? And the government says those documents do not exist. This is just literal denial. Here's this thing, no, it's not there, right? And so, and in this sense, the urgency of the non-denial of this particular case has, I think, led to the state and the government constantly trying to employ all the stages of denial simultaneously. With interpretive denial, this is when you acknowledge some facts, but then you twist their meanings, right? So here you've got the police disappeared students, but the students were infiltrated by a drug cartel. Or the police disappeared students and turned them over to the cartel, but it's because the cartel itself was confused, thought the students were actually rivals, right? And there's one major informant, a cartel member in the case, who tells this story, and it says it in his declarations. Oh, we thought they were los rojos, the Reds, right? Which is patently absurd. It's kind of, I mean, I really think it's the equivalent of like athletic buses from Stanford driving out into the Central Valley and being blown off the highway with machine guns and someone saying, I thought they were a rival meth cartel. It's literally that stupid. First off, the police knew exactly who they were. You can hear it in some of the videos where they're saying pinches Ayotzinapos. There's all the testimonies of students saying how they directly addressed them. They knew who they were in all times. Or saying, you know, they say that the students were infiltrated with guerrillas. They say that some of the students actually were members of drug cartels. And so they were just going after those handful of students. So they've got all these different strategies to say what you think happened, which is that these students were forcibly disappeared as students by the state, was different, right? It means something else. And importantly, it doesn't have any kind of a cultural political resonance that you think it should, because actually it was a drug thing, you know? And then 7 minutes, oh my goodness. And then, you know, like, I think one way of analyzing the AMLO administration, López Obrador, and this is what the phrase has been kind of in my head for years, is that he wanted to have his crime of state and eat it too. Like, he wanted to have a crime of state and protect an essential core part of that criminal state activity, which was namely the Army's participation, but not only the Army. I think the depth to which the justice system, and particularly in this case, the federal attorney general's office and the branches of state security were involved in the perpetuation of the denial. And this is, again, hugely important, because at some point, people choose to disappear these students that night, and people high up in the military are aware of that choice, right? And then at some point, the entire machinery of the federal government becomes aware that that choice was made, and they decide to protect that choice. instead of protecting the students, instead of protecting their families, instead of protecting something like social reckoning with that choice having been made. No, they insist over and over again on defending the choice to disappear the students. And so, because I'm almost already at time, I'm going to skip. There's, some of this analysis as well about the implicatory degree, the dimension of denial, which accepts the facts but not what they mean. Here, Peña Nieto, when he says, ya supérenlo, it's kind of like this idea that this isn't really very important. Like, it's awful. They were incinerated by this evil drug cartel and the corrupt police, which we, the good federal government, have already arrested and put in jail. So it's just time to get over it. This insistence on the moral, political level of denial to say this doesn't mean anything, or this doesn't mean what you think it does. It doesn't have this importance. And jumping way ahead, when I say that I think that kind of recasting Mark Danner's thesis statement that Ayotzinapa and this insistence on denial, how it came to happen, but also how it came to be denied, continues to be denied, is a central parable of the drug war and the democratic transition in Mexico. The drug war itself, which is the U.S. to echo the statements about U.S. imperialism, just kind of like constantly hovering like those ships off the coast of Veracruz, or on the edge of political life in Mexico. The drug war itself, which has been foisted on Mexico and on all of Latin America, itself, I believe, has fueled the merger of organized crime as transnational illegal corporations and state security forces, the army, the federal police, state police, local police, and the justice system, and particularly public prosecutors, the whole system of public prosecution in Mexico. These entities, which always maybe had these kind of tenuous, shadowy, complex relationships, the way it's most helpful for me to think about it now is in economic terms of globalization. They have merged. These now form parts, integral, interlocking parts of single entities. It's impossible to locate massive transnational organized crime, illegal capital in Mexico without consistent, permanent state participation, and vice versa. You're not going to find a state police force, a federal police force, a branch of the army. The Marines just got busted with the huachicol, right? I mean, in Mexico, without their interpenetration with transnational criminal capital. And in a sense, this also makes me think of the Argentine/Mexican analyst Adolfo Gili's important book about the Mexican Revolution, La Revolución Interrumpida. And I'm thinking about La Transición Interrumpida, like the democratic transition in Mexico that was interrupted, that was transformed, better yet. I think, and this is brazen and silly, but when you study moment by moment, hour by hour, that night, and also these now 11 years of denial of the Ayotzinapa mass atrocity, what you find is it reveals this merger of state security forces, public prosecution, justice system, and the drug industry and the drug war itself. And it thus shows us that the democratic transition became the entity that decided to protect that, to hide that, right? So take the first 6 years of the PAN, which is Calderón, which begins with something similar to Obama in the US, hope and change, like it's the transition, seeds of democracy, this kind of language. And by the end of it, the country's in flames. You've got Oaxaca 2006, you've got the Zapatista other campaign, you've got massive protests around impunity, around mining accidents in Pasta de Conchos, mining, organizing in Sicarza. You've got the mass rape as a weapon of war in Atenco, and the cover up of that. 2006 is this, which is about to be 20 years ago, this vital year of Mexican protest, of people in the streets, of people organizing. The image, I lived this year as a reporter in Mexico, and I really think like the image of that year was a fist in the air, was people marching in the street, was people organizing. 6 years later, at the end of Calderón's 6-year term, the image of Mexico is el encajuelado, el colgado. It's the narco violence. It's the cruel presentation of dismembered and destroyed bodies in the logic of the drug war. And 6 years later, after Ayotzinapa, the image is absence. it's mass forced disappearance, and then it becomes las madres buscadoras, women combing the hillsides looking for the bones or the remains of their disappeared children. And in that sense, I think that this massive betrayal of the nation on behalf of the state, with three different political parties, by the way, Morena, I think, becomes the zombie voodoo resurrection of the PRI. Like the PRI lives now in the structure of Morena, which the Ayotzinapa case, as just one example, because it's not isolated, it's not the only mass atrocity, it's not the only mass atrocity that's been denied to this extent, but it's one that has grabbed and galvanized social attention. Also, one of probably the most exhaustively documented mass atrocities in Mexican history, thanks to people who are here with us who did that documentation. That democratic transition was twisted, transformed into a narcocratic transition. And with that, thank you very much.
I feel like John deserves double applause for actually finishing exactly on time, exactly 20 minutes. Very nice. So I wanted to transition now as well to thank you first for this overarching view of Ayotzinapa. I think that the discussion of what Ayotzinapa means, what its denial and its cover-up means, how it is connected to the drug wars, how it is connected to the kind of demise of the hope that came with the democratic transition. It kind of makes you feel a little bit like Ayotzinapa. It brings you into the middle of a Gordian knot, right? You are in the middle of a Gordian knot. And I was going to introduce Claudia. I don't know if Claudia wants to speak. Oh, yes. Oh, excellent. Yes. I was like, she's leaving.
She's leaving.
And so as a way to find guidance and kind of perhaps figuring out how to untie this knot, the Inter-American Commission managed to strong arm Mexico at a moment when it was politically weak. And in fact, in large parts, thanks to former professor here, Jim Cavallaro, who was the commissioner in charge of Mexico and the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights, and massive protests and a lot of fallout for the Mexican government, it allowed for the establishment of a commission of experts, and which was to be convened and appointed by the commission, which was really a key part of that negotiation. And what they did was appoint people who had the courage to prosecute perpetrators of mass atrocities in the Americas, understood the obstacles in their own country. And we are so fortunate to have Claudia Paz y Paz join us to give us her reflections on that process. So let me just introduce her. And I think that no matter how long I stay here, I would not be doing justice to her incredible and trailblazing work. Claudia Paz y Paz was Guatemala's first female attorney general and is the former secretary for Multidimensional Security at the Organization of American States. She's the current director of the Mexico and Central America program at the Center for Justice and International Law. For those of you who might not have heard of CEGIL, it is kind of the preeminent litigator in the Inter-American human rights system. It is a fantastic organization. Claudia is a criminal law specialist. She's a scholar, a judge, and a litigator who has worked for over 18 years to strengthen the justice system in Guatemala. She earned her doctorate in human rights and criminal law at the University of Salamanca, served as a judge, and was the national consultant to the United Nations mission in Guatemala. In 1994, she founded the Institute for Comparative Criminal Studies of Guatemala, a human rights organization that promotes restorative justice and protects the rights of marginalized and discriminated groups during criminal proceedings. Paz y Paz assumed leadership of Guatemala's Ministerio Público, which is the public prosecutor's office, from December 2010 until May 2014. And she pursued cases against both the organized criminals of today and the perpetrators of massive human rights abuse in the past. Please join me in welcoming Claudia Paz y Paz. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias por esa introducción, Loret, y muchísimas gracias, Elizabeth, Samantha, por la invitación. Para mí es, la verdad, un privilegio poder estar de nuevo con Omar, con John, pues contar o recordar parte de lo que nosotros vivimos alrededor del terrible caso de la desaparición forzada de 43 estudiantes de la escuela en Ayotzinapa. Creo que John ha sido muy profundo en describir la negación. Entonces yo me voy a dedicar a describir el esclarecimiento y cómo se dio y por qué se dio el esclarecimiento, lo poco que se esclareció, por qué no llegamos a esclarecerlo plenamente, cuáles fueron los obstáculos a la verdad. Y quizás lo primero que deberíamos de recordar, de mencionar, es qué ocurrió en octubre, bueno, luego del 26 y 27 de septiembre del 2014, ¿qué pasó en México? Y creo que no podemos obviar que el dolor de los padres, la fuerza de los estudiantes que sobrevivieron esa noche, llenó las calles de México en protesta. Eran miles de personas reclamando que se esclareciera el caso y que se encontraran a los estudiantes. Y por esa fuerza de las mamás y de los papás, de los estudiantes, de los propios estudiantes, de las organizaciones de derechos humanos que los acompañan, y de lo que mencionaba Cloret también, de un comisionado comprometido con lo que estaba ocurriendo en ese momento en México y ante la crisis del gobierno de Peña Nieto, que no sabía realmente qué hacer, es que se estableció este mecanismo que es exagerado. Es la primera vez que se estableció un grupo interdisciplinario de expertos independientes. Era permitir que 5 personas externas con experiencia en investigación llegaran a México y ayudaran, supuestamente, partían de la hipótesis de que se necesitaba apoyo, asistencia técnica internacional, apoyaran a la entonces Procuraduría General de la República, que estaba a cargo del caso, para esclarecer plenamente qué había ocurrido esa noche. Y por supuesto, esa voluntad del gobierno de México no fue regalada, no fue gratuita, no fue producto de su sincero deseo de saber qué había ocurrido. Escuchamos a John decir que el Estado de México estaba encubriendo, estaba negando. ¿Por qué lo hizo? Bueno, pues porque no soportó esa crisis, no soportaba las marchas, no soportaba los reclamos, lo que comenzó como algo que pensaban que podían manejar, cobró una importancia y trascendencia internacional, y lo único que les dio como el salvavidas para llegar a enero, que es cuando, a marzo, que es cuando nosotros llegamos a México, es que firmaron este acuerdo para que la Comisión Interamericana, un tercero, pues mandara a este grupo de expertos a México a ayudar con las investigaciones. Teníamos un mandato respecto del esclarecimiento de la verdad, un mandato que era el mandato más difícil y en el que aún tristemente estamos en deuda, que era determinar plenamente el paradero de los estudiantes. Avanzamos, pero no lo hemos logrado hasta ahora y creo que es algo que vamos a cargar en nuestros corazones y en nuestras conciencias, aunque creo que hicimos todo lo que estuvo en nuestras manos. Y una recomendación también que era las medidas de reparación para los familiares y también medidas de no repetición para el fenómeno en general de desaparición forzada en México. Y cuando llegamos, lo que nos encontramos fue lo que John les describía, ¿no? Un esfuerzo por decir, esto era un asunto municipal, hubo autoridades, pero municipales, la policía municipal estuvo involucrada, era un intento de los estudiantes de boicotear un acto municipal del alcalde Abarca. los estudiantes no eran tales estudiantes, eran o guerrilleros o narcotraficantes, estaban infiltrados, es decir, había lo que el caso nos muestra desde el principio es que la verdad era un espacio de lucha. La versión de los sobrevivientes, la versión de los padres, la versión de los periodistas que habían estado ahí esa noche y la versión del gobierno que trataba de ocultar todo esto. Y ¿cómo íbamos a hacer nosotros, 5 personas? Ninguno de nosotros mexicanos, éramos 2 colombianos, una fiscal, Ángela Buitrago, otro compañero, colega, abogado, defensor de derechos humanos, Alejandro Valencia, un médico psiquiatra, Carlos Berenstein, y un abogado chileno, Francisco Cox. ¿Cómo íbamos a lograrlo? Y por supuesto que empezamos con muy buena fe, trabajando junto con la Procuraduría. Obtuvimos un expediente que eran miles de folios, no sé, ciento y la madre tomos en aquel momento. Era una avalancha de información seguramente para perdernos. Y comenzamos 2 rutas paralelas de investigación. Por un lado, sobre lo que estaba ocurrió esa noche, y por el otro, lo que aparecía en los expedientes de la investigación. Y vimos cómo eso no coincidía. Primero, y esto creo que es algo fundamental, muy importante para aquellos que se dediquen a la investigación social, escuchar a quienes habían estado ahí y comparar lo que nos decían los estudiantes sobrevivientes con lo que aparecía en el expediente. Y la primera sorpresa de todos nosotros es que faltaba un autobús. No había este autobús, no estaba en el expediente, no estaban las noticias. Apenas un periodista independiente había publicado sobre esto. Y en ese 5.º autobús era la clave del móvil. ¿Por qué había habido un enfrentamiento tan sangriento entre la policía municipal, que estaba absolutamente, era como el brazo armado, o uno de los brazos armados de Guerreros Unidos del cartel de la droga? En ese autobús supuestamente estaban traficando heroína hacia Chicago, ¿no? Como posteriormente, y seguro Omar nos va a comentar sobre esto, se estaba escuchando esos eventos se estaban escuchando en una investigación acá por el trasiego de heroína en autobuses. Entonces, esa primera confrontación de lo que decían los sobrevivientes con el expediente nos abrió la puerta a entender de que no era algo local, que era algo muchísimo más profundo y más grave que estaba vinculado con el narcotráfico. Y luego también continuar viendo el expediente para nosotros se volvió una especie de, no sé cómo, tal vez suena un poco exagerado, de escena del crimen a la vez, porque vimos que daban por demostrados hechos que no tenían ningún sentido. La llamada verdad histórica se fundamentaba en algo que nosotros científicamente demolimos. No era posible que en esa noche, con esas condiciones, hubieran hecho una hoguera de tal dimensión que hubieran incinerado a las 43 estudiantes a la vez. Se habría quemado todo el lugar, se habría visto el fuego desde lejos, se habrían quemado los Guerreros Unidos que supuestamente estaban avivando el fuego. No coincidía el lugar, no coincidía, imagínense. Y es muy duro lo que voy a decir, pero imaginémonos cómo estaría un lugar después de asesinar a 43 personas en una sola noche. En el basurero de Cocula no había sangre, no habían vestigios. Manipularon absolutamente toda esa escena. Entonces, de nuevo, la propia investigación no podía esconder la negación, no podía esconder el encubrimiento y daba cuenta de que por algo se estaba tergiversando de una manera tan deliberada y escandalosa lo que realmente había ocurrido. Y el otro punto que fue muy interesante era volver a hacer con la debida diligencia lo que deberían de haber hecho los investigadores. y junto con los estudiantes volvimos, como que partiendo de cero, lo que hubiera hecho cualquier investigador, recorrimos los lugares, las localidades de Iguala, la camionera donde se toman los autobuses y se llevan este quinto autobús que tenía la heroína por las calles que vimos en el video, seguimos por dónde fueron, qué cuadraba, qué no cuadraba. Y en ese caminar descubrimos videos. Y en un video de la camionera aparecía este quinto autobús que siempre estuvo oculto. Y habían otros lugares, incluso lugares del Poder Judicial del Estado, donde había videos que habían sido ocultados. O sea, no era ni muchísimo menos, y a eso me quiero referir, no se trataba para nada de un asunto meramente municipal. Y nosotros imaginaríamos, porque eran 5 autobuses, eran más de 100 estudiantes. ¿Cómo se van a llevar 43 estudiantes? Entonces pensaríamos, no, se trataba de calles desiertas, no había nadie. Y no era así, era una ciudad, las desapariciones ocurrieron en calles, pues, habían carros pasando, y ahí es donde vamos ampliando la responsabilidad de otras policías. Sin la participación de la Policía Federal desviando el tráfico, eso no hubiera podido ocurrir. Sin la participación de la Policía Estatal, que también acompañaba a los policías municipales, eso no habría podido ocurrir. Sin la participación de una tercera policía, y ahí aparece la policía de Utsuco, esto no habría podido ocurrir. Y entonces la dimensión de esto que se trataba de minimizar a un asunto municipal de unos jóvenes desviados, revoltosos, iba cobrando más y más fuerza, implicando más y más fuerzas de seguridad. Cuando nosotros entregamos el primero y el segundo informe, no logramos llegar a lo que seguramente les va a contar Omar, que explica mucho, vos dijiste 2 razones para la negación, ¿no? La implicación de los militares y de los encargados de la investigación. Yo sinceramente creo que es más lo primero que lo segundo. Y nosotros no lo logramos determinar en estos 2 primeros informes, pero quedaba claro que no habían hecho nada, absolutamente nada, para defender a los muchachos, pudiendo haberlo hecho. Estaba ocurriendo frente a sus narices y no pararon las desapariciones, ni realmente, y bueno, luego sabríamos más, pero no lo quiero decir, lo va a comentar Omar, ¿no? De cuán enterados estaban de lo que estaba sucediendo esa noche. Y un último elemento que quiero poner sobre la mesa, caminamos con los testimonios para esclarecer la verdad, caminamos con el expediente para esclarecer la verdad, volvimos a peinar, quizás no se le da la importancia verdadera a la investigación de la prensa. Volvimos a recorrer todas las investigaciones que había hecho la prensa independiente, y apareció un nuevo video que habían tomado periodistas en el río Cocula un día antes de que se encontraran los restos de uno de los estudiantes. Y cuando nosotros vimos ese video, lo que vimos era cómo estaban manipulando totalmente la escena del crimen, ¿no? Para nosotros, lo que se veía en ese video era cómo estaban depositando evidencia para desviar la investigación. Y un puntito más, en este tiempo seguramente vamos a poder profundizar, si ustedes tienen comentarios o preguntas, pero que no quiero dejar de mencionar cómo, por más involucrados que estuvieran con Guerreros Unidos, cómo por más recibieran pago del tráfico de drogas, cómo se pudieron atrever las autoridades municipales, estatales, federales, a hacer una atrocidad de este tamaño. Y creo que hay que decirlo porque esto no habría podido ocurrir en Ciudad de México. Los estudiantes eran estudiantes indígenas, eran estudiantes pobres. Dijeron, nadie va a hablar por ellos. La impunidad se va a quedar acá. No son personas importantes. Y un factor más, John, ¿cómo les decían a los estudiantes? Ayotzinapa, porque había una rivalidad histórica desde las autoridades frente a la escuela, que había sido siempre una escuela que exigía sus derechos. Entonces, aunque el móvil directo en ese momento era que los estudiantes sin saber habían tomado un autobús que llevaba heroína, que iba a ser trasladada hacia Estados Unidos, ya había una relación histórica, digamos, de desprecio, de odio contra estos revoltosos que siempre nos están tomando autobuses, que vienen de esta escuela, donde sí, es cierto, se habían formado líderes guerrilleros, y había otra razón de más para que ese hecho ocurriera y que ese hecho quedara en la impunidad. Y en el último minuto, si es que me queda alguno, quizás relevar que para nosotros algo que fue fundamental fue la relación con los papás y con las mamás. Para nosotros como investigadores fue un compromiso enorme, moral, ético, de acompañar el caso. Nosotros siempre recordamos que cuando llegamos a la escuela a principios de marzo del 2015, ellos nos pidieron algo muy sencillo y nosotros en ese momento no lo entendimos. Por favor, no se vendan. Y era porque ilusamente no estábamos claros del profundo poder corruptor, no sé cómo explicarlo, de las autoridades mexicanas. Cómo las autoridades mexicanas habían accedido a que fuéramos, porque ellos pensaban que nos iban a poder silenciar o cooptar, pero afortunadamente ese compromiso con los padres y las madres se sostuvo y se sostiene hasta el día de hoy. Bueno, muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Claudia. I'm going to just use the moderator's privilege to highlight a couple of fantastic quotes in English for some of the things that Claudia said that I think really are absolutely relevant. I think that Claudia started with speaking about how the pain of the parents and the strength of the students populated the streets with protests. And that's what created the political weakness of the government to allow this HIE, this group of experts to come. And the theme, the theme that's continuing here is the one of hiding and cover up, right? And if Claudia began by saying if we began by speaking about the cover up and the denial, let's speak about also the process of clarifying, which was what the HIE attempted to do and did. And I think Omar will likely cover a lot of this, but you know, the idea that the truth is a site of struggle from the very beginning. The versions of the government, the official versions, and the versions that the witnesses and those who have survived and seen this were at odds. And what was this group to do? And throughout, I want to highlight this really quite significant part of the investigation and that Claudia speaks about is the listening to the people who had been there, listening to the journalists, listening to those who and even listening carefully to the file that was given to them, hundreds of thousands of pages of files, because to them, and this is the quote I like, it was like a crime scene. The file itself was like a crime scene because it could not hide the fact that it was trying to cover something up. So with all that, the discoveries that they did, I think hopefully Omar will clear up what the fifth bus means. I don't know if you'll talk about it. Yes? Okay. One of the things that Claudia said is there's sometimes not enough attention paid to the investigations of independent journalists, but it was in the investigations of independent journalists that you get a video, and you get to find, they got to find a video that proved that there had been a fifth bus that was completely hidden in the investigative file of the government, which was a bus purportedly carrying heroin to Chicago, which comes to explain the importance and the reason why this had been such a bloody event. And finally, this is a line that I heard earlier today, and it stayed with me, and I hear it again today, now. Claudia said that when they first arrived, they met with the parents, the mothers and the fathers of these students, and they asked them for one thing: please don't sell out. Please don't sell out. And at that moment, they didn't understand what that meant, because they had not realized the tremendous power to corrupt that the Mexican government had and expected to be able to bear upon them. And fortunately, their commitment has remained. And the commitment of some Mexican investigators and officials was also there. And that is why we have Omar here. And so let me just introduce him to continue the story of this uncovering and continuing fight about what the truth is. So it's my absolute pleasure to introduce you to Omar Gomez Trejo. He received his law degree from the National Autonomous University of Mexico, UNAM, and he holds a master's degree from Flaxo. He worked for the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights for 12 years in Mexico and Central America. He was the executive secretary of the Interdisciplinary Group of Independent Experts, the HIE, the group composed by Claudia Paz y Paz and her colleagues for the Ayotzinapa case from 2015 to 2016. He was the lead prosecutor of the Special Unit for the Investigation and Litigation of the Ayotzinapa case at Mexico's Attorney General's Office from June 2019 to September 2022. And most recently, he's a visiting scholar at the Berkeley Law Human Rights Center through the Practitioners at Risk program. And I am so excited to introduce you to Omar so he can tell you his reflections and experience in this investigation on Ayotzinapa. Please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you for Farid, Elizabeth, and thank you for attending this important event about Ayotzinapa. I think John and Claudia just did a great job introducing the case, explaining how the system works in Mexico. And I will start out like saying that John talked about denials, Claudia talked about findings, and I will talk about truth. And truth, unfortunately, is something that politicians in my country doesn't like. And because truth probably more moral reflects, and that's why the whole judicial system, the investigative system works, just to find truth. So this is my image when I arrived at the prosecutor's office, appointed by the Attorney General. And also I want to explain the whole picture before I arrived at that office. It was 2018, AMLO was elected. We had this big celebration about democracy in Mexico. And the first event, public event that the president did was to release a decree to create a truth commission for the Ayotzinapa case. So this is the measure that the government decided to do to face the whole system. Immediately that happened, they had this truth commission. They named an important human rights defender, an important person in Mexico, an Undersecretary of Human Rights, Alejandro Encinas. He put in ahead of this commission, and they start working inside the system. 6 months later, the Attorney General office released another decree and create this special unit to deal with the Ayotzinapa cases. And the families and the experts, they say probably this is the time, Omar. So I jumped to be the head of this office because I was working, as you know, I document the case of the Ayotzinapa case. I was working in the UN office in Mexico. So I went to the rural school like 6 days later. Probably I met John there. And then I started documenting. Then the experts arrived. I met Claudia in Guatemala, working in Guatemala, Alejandro Valencia, and they invited me to be the executive secretary of this group of experts because they need a person inside Mexico who stay there and work with them about the whole journey they need to navigate in the system. So then when they finished their mandate, the two reports, they had very interesting documents. I need to leave Mexico. And I went to Honduras, and then I moved to the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights, invited by Jim Cavallaro, because the transition between the recommendation of the group of experts and the new government was the creation of a special mechanism by the Inter-American Commission to deal with the government with the recommendations that the group of experts leave in the reports. So Jim said, I remember that conversation. I told Jim, hey, Jim, I'm boring in Honduras. Not because the reality is not, it's boring. No, it's because it's happening a lot. So I needed kind of like a pausa. And I say, why don't you move to DC, Omar? And you start dealing with these cases. So my job in DC, Claudia said, when they leave the country, was like 200 file docs of the case. In Mexico, we have this, it's like a saying in the judicial system, the paper holds everything. That's where they reveal the truth unfortunately, by this kind of practices. And when I arrived in DC, I just started reading 600 paper docs, like big files. That was my job. Reading about the whole creation, supporting that false true, false version, and trying to put a clear idea in my mind for what was happening. So when the families and the NGOs and the group of persons say like, yeah, Omar, probably tied to your job, this position, I was ready because I was reading all the files, all the lies, all the things that they reported in those documents. So immediately I arrived inside the Big Dragon. That's how I call it. The Attorney General office is a huge office. It's like 8,800. No, it's more like 8,000 people working inside that institution. And I was named there just by myself. So I started getting to a group of people, small one, working with prosecutors inside the institution, but also working with people from outside the institution. So we create a group to deal with this. So immediately we jump in the investigation, we divide, try to take the recommendations of the group of experts to have a clear idea about the events that disappears that night, and also the false version created by the prosecutor's office. So we got these two big images. So we start, like Claudia said, just rescuing all the witness, the people who saw, who hear something that night, and rescue those voices from there, started rescuing documents, very important documents, and that's part of this. The second part of the group of experts they rescue a lot of documents from the army. So you have a truth commission. A group of experts returned to Mexico. You had a special unit to deal with this case, and also United Nations and the Inter-American system working together. So you have a new special mechanism inside Mexico. This is the measure that probably you need to do to deal with this kind of big impunity issues in the countries. So you got to change the perspective first. You can deal, and that's probably a recognition from the state, that you can deal with these big investigations with the hands, with the prosecutors, with the police officers that you have. You need some help to start conducting an investigation like this one. So that's how we started with this power. But obviously, we have a lot of obstacles and a lot of people wanting to be just doesn't let us advance. And the voices inside this small office that I received, it was like, you will not do anything. So you get this narrative, negative narratives just to go forward in the investigation. So, like I say, we rescued the witnesses, we rescued the survivors' voices. That's where John is so important, because his books rescue all those voices since the beginning. So those images of the students. So we just recover that, we just recreate that. So we start advancing the investigation in these both ways. And also we start working in the search of the student. That was part of our obligation. So we start, for example, working with witnesses and perpetrators that knew what happened that night, inside the state and outside the state. Because this was the big vision that we had immediately. We just started conducting this, and obviously the findings were start working. You know? We started just getting information, started advancing like centimeters of the, you know, chronological hour of that night, because a lot of things happened that night. So I just want to tell you, like, part of the things that we did as a prosecutors. Imagine we work a lot in the pandemic. So when I took the position as a prosecutor, it was June 2019, and the pandemic started in March 2020. So all the prosecutor's office, like, just leave their office and start working from home, or just a little amount of people work that. And we work all the team together because that gave us time to understand the investigation that we were dealing with. And so this let us and give us a lot of important findings. So we started determining like new lines of investigation. For example, the former prosecutor's office who deal with the case, they call it this as a kidnap. And obviously you got to start like naming the things with the right way. We are in front of enforced disappearance. Enforced disappearance is a crime to use to erase a person from the earth, and you're never going to hear about anything about that person. But also, the other side of enforced disappearance is erase any evidence, any leak, any something that could give you, could lead you to a responsibility. So this is the two sides of enforced disappearance. So also the time, so when I arrived was like 5, 6 years. Obviously, a lot of evidences were not there. Probably destroyed, probably erased by the time. A lot of persons who probably participated in the case were killed or just move away, move to the US even. So this is something that you get to deal with. You got this kind of crimes, very complex crimes and very complex situations. So you don't need to fight. I mean, part of it, like I said, it was part to discover what happened with these students that night, but also why they create this full version, why they wanted to create this cover up. Probably John and Claudia just gave a couple of reasons. I'm going to give my perspective at the end of this conversation. Also, so we got start again. We just relaunched the investigation, like the historical treatise was like a big capas, you know, like the street and
Tapas layers.
layers of, you know, and we just took a drill and clean it and started from the beginning again, just to build a strong investigation supported by evidences, by good findings, by good proofs. Also, we relaunched expertise reports like the fire one, you know, the reconstruction of several scenarios, and so this is the kind of things that we just started rebuilding. And also we worked, like I said, with perpetrators and people who knew about that night and what happened to the students. And in November 2019, we find several remain bones not close to the Cocula. Obviously, no, I mean, in a different place. So we started recovering it, and we took those evidences to Innsbruck, Austria, because Innsbruck, Austria was the expert laboratory to come work with very damaged remains. And fortunately, we find 2 students. I mean, we got this, like a lucky to find these remains there and not too very damaged. And they reconstruct the DNA of these remains and they cross it with the family members. And we just have the identification of 2 students. So we were in the right track. We started requesting warrant orders to the judges. We started with the municipality level and then also state level, like they say, like the GA reports and also the investigation that we conduct. We just request this kind of warrant orders to the judges, and they give us. And we started with 1 Army member who was the head of that division that night, who participated in the organized crime and also in the disappearance of the students, and a Navy person and federal police. So we broke that crystal ceiling that the former government wanted to leave there, that this is a local crime, doesn't know that happen. So we cross that and we request those indictments to the judges. So the judges they gave us, and also we start like putting the big heads of the false creation version. Also, we request warrant notice for this. So the justices start working. So immediately the reaction, even inside institutions such as the Attorney General, start changing, like say, hey, something is happening here. What is going on? What is this crazy guy that is just requesting warrant orders? And immediately the people start feeling like, if we need to collaborate, or we just keep it like quiet, like, keeping that silence agreement, or we just start collaborating with the people, because some moment, if I have a responsibility to this crime, they're gonna come for me. So this is the way like we started. Like justice, when you use justice to demand through, to reclaim, to claim true, to say this is what is happening, start working. And it works perfect. I think that this is how the state and the machinery of the state is designed. When it's working like the right way, and the reaction that you have of the perpetrators of these kind of crimes is going to be also try to make it strong, the cover up, try to make more harder the obstacles that you will have in the future, and or just try to be and keep it in silence. So one important thing, and also John and Claudia name it, unfortunately, the false version was created by torture, using torture by the perpetrators. Army members, Navy members, prosecutors, police officers, investigators participate, unfortunately, in that detention and also torture sessions, even like short-term and forced disappearance, and also the false, even just to try to change the version and support the false version. So that's what is happening in October. So we just put an eye on that, like very, with a small team, with a small group of people that works in there. But we had the fortune by this Truth Commission, like I name it, with this political support, we got access to 50 videos that record the sessions of this, unfortunately, torture sessions that the perpetrators had. So we start working on that, and that gives us a lot of perspective, and now it gives us also like a new license investigation to search in different areas of the Mexican government. So part of this findings, like I said, we find 2 students that give us also, and we start thinking about intellectual responsibility. So the heads of the group of the Guerreros Unidos, who was linked, this is really important, the drug trafficking, what departs from Cocula every Friday, so September 26th, it was a Friday. So several buses depart that night every 2 weeks, or every week sometimes, to Iguala to Chicago, from Iguala to Chicago. So that night, that was part of the lines of investigation that we had. It was that one of those buses were taken by the students, and this is the 5th bus. So in the beginning of the investigation, the criminal authorities just report 4 buses. 2 of the students that arrived, 2 of the students that also the students took from the central bus station where they take those buses, and they took those buses. And so this 5th bus, like Claudia said, it was nowhere. So they start putting like an eye on that, and they find this bus, but also we're part of the investigation, because unfortunately we couldn't find a bus. Obviously the bus company show a bus, but it was not the bus, it was not the stickers, it was not the seats, it was completely changed. So you can find anything from there. But when we find the connection in Chicago, that's a work that the J did, But also, when as a prosecutor, that was part of the important things that I say, we need to discover these evidences that are in Chicago. So we start connecting with the US authorities. So we did a work between Mexican prosecutors authorities with the US attorneys and prosecutors in Chicago. And they gave us access to a wiretap that they record from April 2014 to September to November 2014. So in the middle was the Ayotzinapa case. And obviously that helped us to have a clue, no? I mean, what the cartel members report to the US members of the Cartel Guerreros Unidos. But also give us the context, how was the corruption by authorities with the cartel? Because everything was there in message. You know? There was a big wartime, it was everything in message. So also what kind of business they had to support the activities of their cartel. What places, for example, they never need to pass because it was a stop, I'm gonna say that, a checkpoint by the Army or for the Navy. So you have this linking information inside the Army and also the navies to report to the cartel members to say, avoid this place or try to go by this place. You will find it. So, I mean, so you have a collaboration between cartel members and authorities, federal ones, also local authorities in Guerrero. So that gave us the opportunity by the end of 2022 to request a lots of warrant orders, 83 warrant orders where we're involved. Local authorities in Guerrero, federal authorities, and 20 members of the Army. And obviously that have to do to see with this agreement, this impunity, this cover up, like just keep the cover up. So and they didn't like it. So we did that exercise to request warrant orders to the members of the Army and also politicians for two reasons. And one was because they protect him to not touch more federal level, because federal level is the one who coordinates this big fight against organized crime. So they not to be linked with them because that doesn't look good. I mean, so they try to protect the corruption, but also this other part that they were together in business. So that's probably the main two reasons. They create this big, powerful cover-up. Even I remember during that time, 2014, they sent these bulletins to any embassy in the world from Mexico to say, please, if you talk about Ayotzinapa case, you will talk about these kind of things. So I just will leave there. Probably we just can go a little deeper with the questions, but thank you very much for the space and to explain a little more about this case, Ayotzinapa.
Thank you, Omar. I mean, you have 2 more minutes left, just so you know. I wasn't trying to stop.
No, just
Well, thank you all of you, and I just wanted to open it to questions and then perhaps do some kind of closing tying of patterns and links. So I leave it to the audience if there are questions. And if not, do I see a hand? There's a lot of hands. And also internet and yes.
Primero, muchísimas gracias por venir a esta plática. Really impressed with all the work that you've done. Oh, I'm really impressed. Oh, my name is Lucia Huerta. I'm from Mexico. And just saying that I'm very impressed with everything that you've done, and thank you so much for coming here. I feel like I have a lot of questions. A case like this just brings out a lot of questions because there's like a lot of things that happened and many stories that have been told. One of the things I was wondering was, what was the role of the parents in the investigation and this whole process of truth? Also, like how can
Truth Commission can work, or how do you think should work a commission of truth and justice? And what role, if any, does the state have to take in this commission? Okay, so I don't know if you want to answer this question or take a few questions. A few? Okay. So let me just repeat the two questions here were, what's the role of the parents in the investigation? And then what is the place of, how should a truth commission work, and what should the state be doing as well? Yes.
Hi, thank you. I'm Ana Paula. I'm a postdoc at the Center for Democracy, Development and the Rule of Law here at Stanford. I'm really interested in understanding the dimensions of corruption of this story. I was specifically wondering, when we look at different cases of police corruption and federal corruption, armed forces corruption in Latin America, we see the coercive capacity resting more within the state, so that they extract from the criminal groups. So they shackle down and they extort from criminals, etc. Here it seems to be the other way around. The criminals are the principals and the state is the agent. Is that what I'm understanding? Is that what happens? Do you have theories about why?
And I'll take one more question. Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for all your contributions to this important history. I had a question about 2014. There were very controversial education reforms that were happening nationally as well. And the La Cente was involved in a lot of the protests, and the students from Ayotzinapa often are activists that end up in La Cente. So how much was what happened to the students and what's sort of circling there also about like the critiques that were happening against the national education reforms and wanting to sort of quell that down as well?
So I'll just repeat them backwards. So the educational reforms in 2014 and the protests around them, and the role of the Ayotzinapa students, and what role might that have had. The question about the patterns of corruption, which seem to be upside down in Mexico, where usually in Latin America, the state is the principal in the corruption, and it extracts from the criminal organizations. And here it seems to have flipped and have the criminal organizations be the principals and the state actually serving. And then I repeated those questions. So I don't know who wants to take it and start. Yes, Claudia.
Quizás la última pregunta, si entendí bien, es que normalmente el Estado es el principal foco de corrupción y en este caso pareciera que los agentes estatales eran empleados, algo así.
Sí, que normalmente el Estado es el que extrae y el que es el corrupto que utiliza el espacio o las fuerzas criminales, y aquí es al revés, parece que los criminales son los principales y el Estado los sirve sus propósitos, y quería saber si esta observación es correcta.
Seguro mis compañeros van a profundizar en ese punto porque es un punto nodular del caso. Lo que nosotros pudimos descubrir, fundamentalmente por lo que Omar describía de las interceptaciones de Chicago, es que la policía municipal, la policía federal, la policía estatal y algunos militares eran pagados por el narcotráfico. Eran los sicarios del narcotráfico. Entonces no es lo que vemos en otros países quizás, que el narcotráfico paga para la impunidad, que también ocurría, sino que los agentes de seguridad, las fuerzas de seguridad, eran por un lado su brazo armado y por el otro lado los que le tenían que garantizar la ruta segura desde Iguala hasta Chicago. Y ese nivel de corrupción, y es otro elemento que no nos dio tiempo de mencionar, nosotros sí tuvimos acceso a documentos militares que daban cuenta, uno, que los muchachos los seguían antes, durante y después, era un objetivo de inteligencia. Entonces también por ese lado estaban infiltrados. Había un agente de inteligencia que era un estudiante, que se hacía pasar por estudiante. Entonces era imposible que no supieran y no hubieran podido prevenir ese hecho. Pero lo otro es el nivel hasta dónde se supo. No era un asunto municipal, no era un asunto estatal. La corrupción llegaba hasta los más altos niveles de la Secretaría de Defensa y por eso este gran esfuerzo por negarlo.
So let me just translate real quick for those, yeah, I'm going to assume yes. So this is about the first question, the corruption question. That is the node, like the crux of this case. And what we can uncover was that the municipal police, the state police, and the federal police were all implicated. But normally, in other countries, the drug trafficking organizations usually pay for impunity. That's what they do. But here they were the armed force of the drug traffickers. They were their assassins, and they were also in charge of guaranteeing their safe passage to Chicago. And one thing I didn't mention earlier, says Claudia, is that the HIE had access to the military files as well. Once they got to military files that showed that they had files on the Ayotzinapa students. They had been following them. They had an infiltrated person pretending to be a student. So this was the degree of knowledge that they had. And the other thing is how high corruption reached. It wasn't just municipal, it wasn't just federal, it reached the highest levels, which included secretaries of defense, I think. Yeah, and which explains why there was such a push to keep this hidden. Anybody else want to take either?
Okay. Yeah, and also just to recall that this student who was working for the army and also a student is disappeared. He's disappeared. I mean, he's disappeared now. And also, for example, the army had a special protocol to rescue the soldiers that were for them, and also the army didn't activate that protocol. This student is one of the 43 students missing. I want to take the question of family members. Family members are very important for these kind of cases. They're part of the core of any investigation. You got to work, and I say this as a human rights person who's being a human rights expert and also criminal one. You need the victim next to you, because also it's an act and it's an exercise of accountability to do the right way. If you don't have that, if the authorities are not doing that, at least in Mexico, they completely lost. So we use that as a part, because like I said, the family members call me and say, Omar, I think it would be great that you take. And I raise my hand and I say, yes, I would take this responsibility, because I feel the support of the families. Without the support of the families, unfortunately, probably I couldn't do it. I just received like 3 months probably. But you need that. You need that strain, that frustration, that energy also, because that impulse to do the actions that you need to do to deal with this case, like I said. And also, as Claudia said, when the group of experts arrive, they say like, hey, don't sell up yourself. That's the same thing they sell it to me, because I was going to be working inside the system and dealing with the possible perpetrators of that. Then, probably yes. I mean, this is probably something different about what we know about corruption during that time in Latin America. This is a very active role about the authorities, like different levels with the cartels. We were like, this is not the thing that just the police officers took money and they say, I'm just going to turn to a different way. No, it was not like that. It was a very active role that the authorities had with the cartel. So this was not cooptation like the politics call it. It was not that. That's why I say they worked together. It's probably a different, perspective to observe this kind of corruption in Mexico, link it with the cartel, but also protecting, the roots, the money, everything. They use, for example, why they use enforced disappearance crimes in that area in Guerrero, because when the disappearance of the students happened, there were more like 200 people disappeared in Iguala Guerrero, close to Iguala Guerrero. Even there, that race and movement call it los otros desaparecidos. Because, but for example, the pattern of this false true version about the Coca-Cola Dome and also the ashes and throw it into the river, it was completely different from the way they disappear in the area. So this is part of the ideas of the lines of investigations you got to deal with it, to follow them up. And also the 2000 reforms, and I leave that one to John, is I think there was a feeling of the federal level authorities wanting to close all the rural schools in Mexico. And Ayotzinapa, like, this is Guerrero. Guerrero is a very special state, and also Ayotzinapa, it was a very special rural school. Yeah.
John?
Yeah, well, thank you for all those questions. They're all really important. Quickly about the role of the parents in the investigation. There's, as a reporter, I was very attuned to this, and something I think often gets left out of the discussion, perhaps. But the families investigated before anybody else. Before I showed up and started investigating, before either of them showed up and started investigating, within hours, the families were on the streets in Iguala. The students as well, they were organizing from the school. They were sending commissions out. And then, like, the hours and days after the atrocity, the families are going door to door. They're wandering through the market in central Iguala. They're literally heading, risking their lives, heading out into the hills, like calling, like they're looking for their sons almost immediately. As well, like when at the very beginning of the historical truth of La Histórica, when they first present, which again, like, note that the government didn't meet with the families to say, hey, we have this information, this is what we think happened. No, the families see it on national television, that they're saying your children were incinerated and these, cannibals were eating bits of their flesh as they're feeding the fire, like horrendous, right? And they're seeing it on national television. What did they do? They organized, they went out there, they walked down into the trash dump, they took a look at it before anybody. And they're farm workers who worked the land, who use fire to clear land and let fields lie fallow so that they can, sow those fields a year or two later. They know how fire works. They work with fire every year. And they got there and said, it's impossible. Like, science wouldn't take their knowledge seriously. The HIE would come later and, contract science, and science would confirm what the farm workers, right, knew from working the land, saying a fire of that magnitude could not have happened here on this date. Look at these plants that are here. Like the parents directly were seeing that and producing that knowledge, sharing that knowledge. But of course, the state didn't take that knowledge seriously. So I think and this is a window into something that existed before Ayotzinapa, and as Omar mentioned, with the other disappeared and the formation of family members of the disappeared collectives across the country would explode after Ayotzinapa and become, in my opinion, one of the most heartbreaking, devastating, and courageous and important social movements of our time, which is the families of the disappeared. And so they not only do all the investigative work, they become detectives, they become forensic anthropologists, they become fundraisers, they become nonprofit executive directors, they become all of these things desperately trying to find their children. But they also, in my opinion, constantly reveal these truths that the state is trying to hide, which is this, and this gets to the question about corruption. I really think, and again, I'm totally wrong, but for me, it's more useful to think in terms of merger, like this dry, hard, cold language of business, right? I don't think it's corruption. Corruption, for me, as a concept, assumes that there's an otherwise pristine entity that functions according to its guidelines and laws and discourse and so on, but that is being invaded by these external forces and pulled out of its realm of activity. This is the corrupting forces. And I don't think that's the case anymore, if it ever was. But I think what we're talking about is now, especially organized crime as it currently exists, this massive transnational capitalist industry cannot function without the systematic participation in the industry of the state forces. And I think that the state forces, as a result, have themselves transformed in such a way they no longer function as they do without this constant influx of cash and also murderability, or the capacity to produce atrocity and have it read through an apolitical lens of drug violence, which has become a systematic function of the drug war in this past 10 years of horror in Mexico. Feminicide becomes like washed into drug violence, like persecution of teachers and teachers unions and students gets washed into drug violence and all that. So that's my thought about that flip, is that for me, it's more helpful to try and think of these kind of colder terms of merger, of business restructuring, like they really like Marx did, right? Take the capitalist language and say, okay, how can we better describe what's happening on the ground here? Very quickly about the education reforms. I think that was part of it, like 2014 in Mexico, it's Enrique Peña Nieto with his coif on the cover of Time magazine, and the title is Saving Mexico. And it was all about these reforms they were pushing through. And it was hysterical, right? Because supposedly the democratic transition, but it's the image of the PRI on the cover of Time is like, we're new now and everything. And there was the energy reform and there's the education reform. And as also, I think an important part of that, so the violence against the school comes in for me as a part of this. We've just got to eliminate this kind of old leftist Mexico, these socialist traditions, these indigenous traditions, these left-wing traditions, get rid of them one by one. Calderon had been trying to do the same thing. He tried to associate the Zapatistas with drug traffickers, and it just failed so miserably and so immediately that he scurried away with the tail between his legs, didn't try it again. That was 2008 when they sent the army into the Zapatista territory, tried to say they're looking for drugs. And the Zapatistas shot them with slingshots, and everybody it was a fiasco, didn't go well. And I think that part of the violence against that school at night and the insistence of the cover-up is because they just want to get rid of it, as Omar said. Little by little, they want to get rid of it. Another dimension, though, of that whole thing is that since the teachers' unions, and you mentioned La Cente, which is super important, were so organized around fighting those educational reforms. Initially, that organization was huge on the ground in Guerrero. There was a campamento, plantón, right, a protest encampment in the capital of Guerrero, Chilpancingo, which lasted for months. And the presence of bodies on the street of the organized teachers unions in solidarity with the families in the streets, in solidarity with the school, was a huge part of its initial massive force. But it was also corruptible. That was an institution of corruption. They were able to buy off leaders, as they did in Oaxaca in 2006 with Enrique Pacheco and certain members of the teachers union. They were able to buy off members of the teachers union in Chilpancingo. They lift the protest encampments, and it becomes one of the ways they try and weaken the movement, which of course they couldn't. They tried to buy off the parents, by the way. They went door to door. They offered them money, and they would keep doing that for years. And there's some very sad stories of things that happened around the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic with these efforts and pulling some of the families and forcing divisions. The state has never stopped trying to buy the parents, but they were very quickly able to buy the teachers union, and which is a part of this context of when the GIE shows up and they're like, por favor no se vendan, right? Don't sell out. It's because people already had, in their, not only socially in Mexico, but in their immediate movement, there have been people selling out. And then I think it's obviously we can't get too deep into it, but the role of the Truth Commission, what should the state do? These are huge, important questions. I think very quickly, it's important to remember that the Truth Commission for the Ayotzinapa case was not designed as a Truth Commission. It was a very odd creation. It was something designed really to have a political presence and force to try and aid both the special prosecutors once they're appointed and existing, and also the GIE as they're invited back into the country. They've been kicked out by the PRI. They're invited back by AMLO, which of course is at the parents' and the family's insistence. Another example of one of the roles of the families. The families insisted that the GIE come back and stay and participate. So they do all of these things, and they have this Truth Commission, which was apparently to politically have a mechanism to try and just make things happen. When the GIE is going to want to get access to military documents, to have this official person who could be like, okay, army, let them in. Okay, army, let them in. I fear that the Truth Commission actually was a very smart way of having the president able to manipulate the case. We didn't get into this now, but the president did manipulate the case, and the Truth Commission, the Truth Commissioner was an essential part in making that manipulation happen, lying to the GIE, withholding information from them, publishing a report based on false information, pseudoscience that led the HIE to divide and including Claudia, to leave the country in protest of that manipulation of evidence and manipulation of trust. This was the Truth Commissioner and Alejandro Encinas, who played this essential role. Later, he played a role in dividing and invading Omar's office and making it impossible for him to investigate, so that he had to resign and leave the country. So in this case, the Truth Commission was not a Truth Commission of these kind of classic South Africa or other cases, Argentina, Brazil, Nunca Más, all of those cases, which themselves could be analyzed and debated, deeply and seriously. But the Ayotzinapa Truth Commission was something different. It was a different animal. And I think it was actually built to have a tool for the president to, when the time came, to jump in and interrupt the investigation and take control over it, which I think is what happened.
And I think this leads us, to the kind of constant theme of the co-op. Everything becomes co-optable, right? Like everything is co-optable except the parents, which creates
Oh, no, el fiscal.
and the HIE and the fiscal. Well, obviously, that's why you're invited here.
Right.
But the idea that every single one of you mentioned the role of the parents in helping you either obtain information, keep, not giving up and leaving like within 3 months, for example, like surviving there, coming back, and also just using this as a check on truth, right? Like, does this sound plausible to the parents? Are they willing, and are we willing to listen to them so that we can get a specialist in, forensic science or in fires and to confirm what the parents knew had happened. I think that we are close to out of time, so I'm going to just wrap it up. I think just with a couple of themes that I heard that I think are really wonderfully phrased by all of you. One of the things that have been around is that I think you've mentioned this kind of, let's think about it as a merger, let's think about this as corruption. And I think that's a very important image. It's not that there was a pristine something and it's been corrupted. One of the things that it came to mind is that this way of looking at atrocity through an apolitical lens, meaning like, look at all these massacres and disappearances. It's not a guerrilla, it's not the government, it's not the right and left wing, it's the drug cartels. It's just criminal, not political, right? In this attempt, what it does is, if we think of reputation as currency, it is actually a way of laundering this currency, right? So it's a new way of laundering currency that the drug cartels are providing for the state. The other thing is that the opportunistic extermination of the uncomfortable opponents of whatever change and direction we want. And I think that's a pattern that's growing across Latin America. By that, I mean the idea that there's even more reasons, not just, the bus or whatever, but there's even more reasons to not care about them. They're not just poor and indigenous, but they're loud and they're demanding rights. How dare they? That was part of the narrative. And the other thing that I found very interesting, kind of jumping out across the board, is that in all the presentations, there is this, the struggle for truth there isn't an end point, right? In Mexico, at least, it is a constant, and it is going to continue. And the fuel for it is both kind of the government's interest in establishing a truth and being like, ya supérenlo, like be done with it. And the parents saying like, we can't be done with it until we see our children and know what happened and get an acknowledgement. So in many ways, the open wound that is the title of this presentation is what is maintaining this struggle for the truth alive. And I think it's a really important struggle, because the rewriting of history in favor of forgetting and in favor of impunity is actually never it can always happen no matter how long it's been. And we are seeing this happen in Argentina right now, an attempt to rewrite what happened during the dictatorships of the Proceso. We're seeing it happen, well, here, we're seeing it happen in Mexico continuously. The official history, it doesn't die. It's like a hydra, right? It continues. There's, and for those of you who don't know the fire version, like it was just, as you said, the physical evidence confronted against the narrative of the military, I think, is a recurrent theme, at least in Latin America, that the stories that the government tells us can't stand up to the physical evidence and the witness evidence. And so that's why it's so important to prevent access to those. They can't come up fast enough with a story that actually comports with reality. And so that the next step is to cover up and forbid access to those things that will contradict their versions. So I want to thank all of these panelists, not just for the presentations, but for the work that you've been doing and the work you've done. For those of you who haven't read the reports of the HIE, they are available on the website of the Inter-American Commission, and they are truly worth reading. But the story of how they came about as well, the oral histories of the students, as I said, I like that you said rescataron, rescued, because in English, like it rescued evidence, right? We rescued evidence. That's not a usual term in English, but it's so apt here. They recovered evidence, they rescued the stories of the students. And then I think that Omar, the story of working from within the dragon is one that we want to probably hear more and have chronicled more. So I recommend, again, reading up on this and thinking about it as how it impacts, or how it's just a symptom or just a sample of what is going on in, I think, an unfortunately retrenching fight against impunity that we're having across